Okay, I have 7 o'clock. We'll call this meeting of the North Fair Oaks Community Council to order. Begin with a roll call, please.
Commencing roll call now. Vice Chair Blair Whitney,
He was just. Oh, yes, he's here.
Councilmember Juan Carlos Prado,
Here.
Councilmember Everardo Rodriguez,
Here.
Councilmember Nick Searcy, Councilmember Kathleen Daly, Councilmember George Salmon,
Here.
Councilmember Kelly Parisi, Councilmember Mariela Peralta, Brooks Lesser,
Here.
It's hard.
Agenda item 2 is public comment. Anyone may speak up to 2 minutes on any topic not on the agenda. Please note the council may not discuss or take action on items not on the agenda. If you're in Zoom, please, if you're in the room, please fill out a speaker slip presented to the clerk. Those of you in Zoom may use the raised hand feature. Do we have any public comment? See.
no public.
One, please. Go ahead and get started. Tonight's study session is going to focus on the subject for many, many years before that, and that's the issue of parking in our community. What we're going to have tonight is kind of a roundtable and a collection of information from a variety of sources. The Sheriff's Department, we're going to hear from Redwood City and how they've mitigated their parking issues. We're also going to hear from Public Works with regard to some work that was done, gosh, I guess going back about 10 years ago. A lot of money was spent, a lot of time was invested in studying parking in North Fair Oaks. What I'd like to do is give everyone kind of a framework for how to think about the presentations tonight, because afterwards, I'd like to come up with a summary of issues, items that we think we can impact in some way. And perhaps a list of items that we can request from the Board of Supervisors to make some improvement in the parking situation in North Fair Oaks. So let me get into the see what I'm talking about.
Recording in progress.
Am I indeed a presenter?
Sorry, second.
Apologize for the delay on this, but here we go. Pretty simple. I thought as a matter of just a way of keeping track of our discussion tonight, I just put a couple of PowerPoint slides together, basically repeating what I just said. After the presentations, I'd like to talk about the specific issues that we're trying to mitigate. I hope the content of the presentation will give us a sense of the real areas where we can make an impact. And then second, if there's anything that we can actually request to the Board of Supervisors that can help us, and we can discuss different ideas and things like that. But think of those things as you're listening to the presentations. That'll be the basis for our discussion when the presentation is over. So our first presentation this evening, current parking conditions and enforcement. We have Matt Fox here from the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. Matt, please go ahead.
All right, my name is Matthew Fox. I'm a captain here at the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. On behalf of the sheriff, Christina Corpus, thank you for having me here tonight at your North Fair Oaks meeting. So tonight, what I'm going to do is just touch upon three topics to give you a little bit of context as it relates to parking enforcement in the North Fair Oaks neighborhood. We cover up vision and kind of the stance that the sheriff wanted to communicate in 2023, right, as we move into 2024. So one of the first things that we wanted to kind of come up with was kind of let everybody know the ordinances that were involved in the majority of the citations that were issued in the North Fair Oaks community. San Mateo County Ordinance 7.32.010, no parking during specified hours. This is the majority of the citations, and I'll go into the data with the citations and how we receive those calls. In California Vehicle Code Section 21.113. Parentheses A, parentheses 1, which is restricted parking. It's really important to flag for the council tonight is that in 2023, with all of the improvements, capital improvements and road closures and so forth in the North Fair Oaks community, the sheriff's office position as well as the sheriff's position was more of kind of a three-pronged approach. And so first and foremost was education, right? That was paramount during that entire time because of the limited construction and the type of neighborhood in which all the construction was taking place. So there's education, and then there's engineering. Hey, is there anything we can do better during this time with, moving stuff around North Fair Oaks? I mean, it was all just by design. And then the last thing was enforcement. And so I think it's really important for everybody here to understand is that enforcement was the last arm, because we cannot write citations out of this problem, right? This problem's been going on for a long time, but it was compounded by the impact of the improvements being made on Middlefield, on Flood, and the whole area. So we took that into consideration. So when I talk about the statistics of going through that and the decrease, it's really because we really took an approach of education, right? We wanted to make sure we got the message out, especially if it came to safety. If it was repeat offenders, yes, they would get a citation, and that's kind of reflected in the data. And the information I have here, I'll leave with the board after I leave so you can have some context. But from January 1st, 2023 to December 31st, the sheriff's office received 511 parking complaints from constituents pertaining to vehicles illegally parked in the North Fair Oaks community. Parking complaints were reported to the sheriff's office through numerous channels, primarily through email, through the public safety communication, the sheriff's office parking hotline, and phone calls directly to the headquarters bureau, which we supervise. I can tell you, just as the captain of the headquarters, since the time I've been here, we get numerous complaints from Warren Slocum's office for some habitual stuff. We have a really good relationship with some of the merchants of the council, and they come directly to me. And we have a reporting mechanism at headquarters where we kind of track that, to kind of see if there's a pattern of problems that are keep existing, where we went out and then we really tackled the enforcement aspect of getting that out, because the education wasn't working. So I can tell you, like in the flood area, we had so many complaints of the flood area, people double parking, cars and so forth. So we just did a campaign to go to all the business owners, a lot of them in relationship to auto body shops, restaurants, and really educate them. And we gave them a pretty good window to kind of get everybody to comply, because the last thing they wanted to do was go down and blanket in enforcement. So that was kind of the approach we wanted to take. And we still do that to this day, but initially, because the complaints were coming in so profoundly for safety. And when it comes to safety, then we start doing enforcement if they're not going to listen to the education aspect of what we're doing. So that was just calls coming into headquarters in the way in which I told you. The level of enforcement the San Mateo County office provides. So the major areas of concern that we're talking about tonight is Flood Avenue, Fair Oaks Avenue, and Barron Avenue, and the 3000 block of Middlefield Avenue. The majority of the parking citations issued in unincorporated North Fair Oaks community were as follows. For the no parking during specified hours, which was the county code 7.32.010, we issued 5,062 citations, which made up 43% of the citations in North Fair Oaks, was for the no parking during specified hours. In relationship to restricted parking, the 21-113 subsection A, we issued 1,185 citations from January 1st to December 31st. That made up 10% of the parking violations. Those two sections right there made up about 53% of the citations in relationship to the parking that were out there. The majority of other ones were warnings, and we track those as well, not as comprehensive as we would like, but we take into consideration all of the warnings that we gave all the businesses up and down Middlefield in those areas. So when I say that the numbers, the 5,000, let's just say it's 6,200 citations during the year, that was down from the previous year. And we contribute that to kind of the messaging that we did in the community and kind of the approach that the sheriff's office wanted to take in relationship to that. And it should be noted that we have 4 community service officers who are assigned to the North Fair Oaks community. Those 4 CSOs are the people who generally enforce all of the parking enforcement other than deputies who go out for calls for service. People call, they issue citation or a warning, and the other percentage that is not related in the data is mostly advisements or warnings. Because the problem you have to understand is when we go out and someone says, hey, someone's blocking my driveway. The easiest thing for somebody to do is just go out there and go, oh, okay, and just write a ticket, right? But then they walk by 2 more cars blocking someone's driveway, right? So if you do that one, you got to hit the whole block, right? Because then people feel like they're singled out or whatnot. The other big thing to know is that when the parking complaints come in, if we can go find the registered owner, this takes time. The deputy will run out the vehicle, say, oh, it comes back to 1, 2, 3 flood. Let's go, hey, you got to move your car. So those extra steps take up a lot of the deputies' time, but it was really kind of the message during this time. And we're kind of transitioning out of that now because a lot of the construction is starting to end. We're starting to get better signage, and that's starting to come up now. The signage is starting to go up, and people are like, oh, we didn't know that you're going to start enforcing. It just came up today and yesterday of people complaining, like, I didn't realize we're doing enforcement again, right? So now we have to kind of circle back to our original position to kind of get that message out, and that's where we could use this board and people here in the community to kind of push that message out that at some point we're going to have to start enforcing the rules of the road, restricted parking and so forth, because that's what the residents want, but there's got to be a measured approach. So that's really the biggest information I wanted to provide to you, was kind of the direction during the last year. And that's not going to be the same direction now, but we're kind of circling back to the education and not necessarily enforcement. We're going to start getting into that, but hopefully it gives you kind of a glimpse. There is a decrease in the amount of citations, but that was like a unicorn year, right? There was a lot going on in that neighborhood at the time. And it was really, really important that not to disrupt kind of like the neighborhood as a whole and just enforce our way out of it, because it wasn't working. We can't do it, right? So education was the biggest focus of the sheriff. Do we have any
Do
questions?
you have any questions for,
Yeah, I do.
please,
Yeah,
Edward, go ahead.
thank you, Captain, for coming to
No problem.
present. Nice meeting you. One of the questions I have is regarding the number of officers that you said were assigned to North Fair Oaks. Did you
So community service officers,
Oh, community service
Yes.
officers? Okay, did you say how many?
4.
4, okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so something that I've seen is that particularly on the days when the street sweeper is supposed to go by, there's a hit and miss of, cars parking and obstructing, the whatever street.
Yeah.
And that's very unfortunate because, the trash remains there. And so I'm wondering, I know that during the pandemic, the ticketing wasn't being enforced because, a lot of people lost their jobs, that sort of thing. And that was great. But I haven't seen much of a change since. So that is one. And the other real question that I had was in regards to large vehicles that are parked, sometimes indefinitely, or that move, like a few feet and then, they leave it there.
Yeah, they play the game.
Right. So is there anything in regards of county enforcement for those very large vehicles?
Yeah, so, you have to move your car, right? So, this isn't just indicative of North Fair Oaks, right? So before I came to the sheriff's office, I was in Daly City for 25 years. So you can imagine the parking in Daly City as a whole, right? So especially on the Mission corridor, they understand the rules, right? So if you see a car, you call, hey, this car hasn't moved. No problem. We go out, we mark it, we log it, put a CAD number in. Once you mark it, what happens? They scrape it off, they drive around the block, they put a couple miles on it, or they move it across the street. And then we have to wait for another complaint to come through. There's too many cars to track all the time to do that. Sometimes if we see a car like that, the first thing we're gonna do is try to find the registered owner. If it comes back out of Hayward, it comes back out of Fresno, you're like, okay, then you can check the database. Hey, do we have any local contacts with this gentleman, the RO, the registered owner of the car, to try to get that car to move because we understand the impact it has on the neighborhood. So in relationship to that, it's a game, fortunately, right? But I do understand your frustration on the cars that do park for a long time and they may be able to park for a week and a half. And you think, oh, because no one's called for us to start that log again. But we have identified the CSOs. They know the cars that play the game, right? And there's not really much we can do from an enforcement standpoint. That's not really the goal. The goal is to, free up parking. It's not in a residential neighborhood. You don't need a big moving truck every night for a guy who lives somewhere else or registered. So we do what we can, but again, it's kind of like chess and checkers, right? We're moving things on the table. What was the first question you had that I wanted to?
So that was about vehicles parked on streets that are supposed to get swept, by the monthly.
Yeah, so again, it's, the street sweeper goes by, right? Some guy moves his car, they sit in the car, they wait for the street sweeper to go by, and then they go park, right? And so we're not gonna double back to get them, A lot of times with the CSOs, if you don't see them, it doesn't mean they're not out there, right? Because obviously they're writing a ton of tickets. It's really, really important. I can't emphasize this enough. I understand your frustrations, but what happens is if we start really enforcing that 100% and really doing it, yeah, it's going to have some unintended consequences, right? Not only for this board, but also the sheriff's office, the community as a whole. And that's not really what we want to do, but we understand what you're saying, but I think it needs to be a gradual message that, hey, look, we're going to start doing this because we have to. It's a safety thing, right? When we don't pick up garbage, the streets, if it gets debris, it goes in the flood, it goes in the bay. So I think we're at that point now. And I think it's good. That's why we're having this discussion now, that the messaging has to be consistent and it has to start going out like, hey, look, we've kind of given you this window. You know what I mean? We have a lot going on, but now we have to start kind of enforcing the rules that we enforce everywhere else, but we can't treat you different, right? So I appreciate that, and I'll let them know, and I'll bring that back to the CSOs and kind of get some feedback from them. They say, hey, we're just kind of trying not to, disrupt too much. But I think as part of this board and also just in the neighborhood from the feedback that I get is that we're coming out of that grace period, if you will, as long as we message that out there to everybody. And that's going to be upon all of us to kind of message, because we're really just the arm, right? We're the enforcement arm, and we don't want to just be the enforcement arm, right? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions from council members?
I, through the chair, if I may, now that all 4 lanes are opened up now, I see that some the stop signs are still at every block. But I see that not all the cars stop because they're not marked on the ground. I see cars stop at the stop signs where there's a crosswalk because, there's a ground marking there, even though it doesn't say stop, but there is. But anyway, so what's the deal with that?
I think streets should probably give you a better answer. Obviously, it needs to be cleaned up, right? We have to go back to the original design, what that meant to be, because I think the vehicle code, and don't quote me on this, I could be outdating myself, but the vehicle code, it's kind of like a handicap parking stall, right? If there's not a handicap logo on the street, but there's a sign there, you cannot enforce it, right? So again, we're kind of waiting for this to kind of play out and they can start moving cones around and start fixing it up before we just go, because it's confusing to me too. I'll tell you, I ran a stop sign New Year's Eve. I worked New Year's Eve in North Fair Oaks, and I was like, did I just run a stop sign? And that was me, right? So If I'm doing it, there's always some confusion, right? So luckily for me, I understand, and I think the deputies understand, is that you're gonna make mistakes on that road just because it's so confusing. Even with the lanes opening up, I think that's gonna be cleared up. They're gonna have to start stripping the street. They're gonna have to start doing some better lane dividers and, because I'm confused too. So when it comes to enforcing on that street, I think the residents of North Fair Oaks can make a good argument, like, hey, this is kind of, you know, the rules of the road apply, but at some point, as long as they're not being reckless or whatnot, but I think it is confusing, and I can tell you from my own experience, I was like, this got to get cleaned up a little bit. So.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Got a couple, Mark. First is, and I'm not aware of what the law is on this, but commercial vehicles parked in residential neighborhoods, is that?
Yeah, so I don't know specifically the county ordinance how it's described. So it's going to be during certain hours with a certain type of plate, certain type of length of the actual vehicle. I can get back to you what that is and whether or not we want to start really actively enforcing that, because we do have CSOs at night. Those tickets are very, very expensive. I know in the past, if they do see one that's habitually there, they will try to find the owner of that vehicle to let them know, because that's going to put a dent with that citation. I think it's like almost $500.
Oh, wow.
It's upwards. So maybe someone has the exact amount, but I know it's a big hit. So
When we say commercial vehicles, are we talking about big dump trucks, stuff like that? Or are we talking about vans with?
yeah, so it's length, right? So you'll have CSOs out there. You can do it by wheelbase. And I have to look really into the specific ordinance itself, which will define exactly what a commercial vehicle is. If it's a tow truck, it's categorized PG&E truck. Those things are categorized as like emergency vehicles. They can park in residential. They're exempt. There's a bunch of exemptions in that. We're looking for, you like the motorhome, right? If it goes over a certain length and certain wheelbase and it falls within the code, our direction is, hey, let's try to see if we can get the registered owner, because that can just sit there for weeks and months at an end and for whatever. But I can get back to you on what that looks like, but I know it's length and width, not necessarily weight, because we can't weigh them, but you can tell which ones fall within the ordinance. But I do know that the fines are egregious. They're pretty big. But we're not really actively doing that, and we won't really do that unless we get a call for service.
I asked because I wasn't sure if we have got a lot of blue collar workers in the area.
Yeah.
People come home with their work trucks and vans. I didn't
It
want.
won't be like an F-250, F-350 won't qualify.
Okay, good. All right.
And I think in relationship to that, that's the 511, right? If we're like, hey, look, we're getting multiple calls on this vehicle, we'll take it, we'll start that, running the person out, trying to make contact. Hey, look, your neighbors are complaining. We're not gonna take a proactive approach to say, oh, here's an RV, let's just give them a ticket, right? If that makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
The other one I had too, and in fact, it came up at the NRT meeting today, was the auto shops on Middlefield. And as I understand it, they have to have parking on site, not only for their customer vehicles, but also for their employee vehicles. And apparently, we're seeing customer vehicles, seeing employee vehicles parked on Middlefield.
Yeah, so I think the direction on that, if they're working on a car, put a fender on it, right? Like, okay, hey, put this out of the street for a little bit, right? So then we get a phone call, that's the complaint. We get a phone call, say, hey, there's a car out here, missing a fender, the hood's off, whatever they're doing, right? Is it legally parked? Is it registered? Is there a time restriction? When we just apply the law, right? But what I can tell you, some of the businesses we have contacted them, and we have the hammer where we can call not only the Better Business Bureau, but there's permitting for those licensed shops, and they have like an administrative fine that they can give people. If we want to do like a business and professions code violation, we can do that. So if we get a complaint of, say you have a complaint that comes into you of an actual auto shop who's continuously doing that, we'll assign that. And there's a business and professions code that will assess a civil fine on them if they don't correct it. We're not there yet because no one's really said, hey, this is it, where we actually put eyes on it. But the business and professions code is a very good section that we use for auto body shops who, put cars out in the street all day long, take up parking in a business district, a residential business, they're leaking oil, they're doing whatever. But once you go in there and you let them know, I'm pretty well versed on the business code. So I go and I let them know what that looks like. And they usually tend to figure it out. Yes, sir.
The parking lot, the county parking lot on Middlefield and Second, that we've got there. What kind of enforcement, if any, is being done on that?
I don't know. But I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Do you have any insight on what enforcement's being done there?
No, I don't. I was just curious because there were times where I would see vehicles, I think it said past 10 PM you can't park, but and it really doesn't bother me, but cars were parking way past 10 PM. And then other days, no one's past 10 PM. I didn't know if there were days where.
And I think, again, I think it's, I mean, event, it's.
No, that's fine. Just curious if
There was no, we're not treating that lot any different than anywhere else. We're trying to just kind of weather the storm, the Middlefield storm
smart.
to get through. And then once we decide as a group, everybody from Public Works, streets, whatever that looks like, we can start doing it as a team.
Thank you.
No problem.
Other questions from council members? So it sounds to me, Matt, if you could have one wish for anything, it would be assistance with the education of.
Yeah, I think the messaging arm of what we're doing here in North Fair Oaks needs to be communicated a little bit better.
Okay.
And that's, it's part of our failure, right? But they don't go to us for advice. We're usually the people that come in at the end when nothing works, right? So, and we don't really want to be that arm of the message, right? So however, we can help you do that. And we've been doing our part with the CSOs, the deputies, and going above and beyond. Like I've gotten many emails saying, thank you just for not giving me a bunch of tickets. And so it's being communicated to the sheriff's office and they understand what we're doing, but at some point that's going to have to stop because if we don't start doing the enforcement arm of it, it's just, it's the broken window. Thing. So if I could ask for one ask is just to kind of put it out to your constituents and the residents to say, hey, look, that window grace period is going to be ending soon. We're revitalizing this neighborhood. We have to make sure there's safety. We have to fix the stop signs, the striping on the street. And then we'll start gradually. I don't want to just jump right back into, enforcement because nobody wins when we do that. And that's not what the sheriff wants.
But I'm thinking if we could resource, for example, the Office of Community Affairs to create some kind of collateral or handout or lead behind.
For sure.
Kind of explains the areas that you guys really are going to focus on now that Middlefield's up to speed.
Yeah.
To get that messaging out to help you guys do the education. And hopefully it'll minimize the amount of enforcement.
Yeah, and we partner with, a lot of nonprofits, that are off of Middlefield, Caron, the Boys and Girls Clubs. We can push that message out.
Okay.
We've done it for probably up until about October. Then the holidays come and everybody just wants to have a happy holiday. But however, we can help you assist that with, pushing it out. Instead of if you come up with something you want to push out, instead of the CSOs giving a ticket, we'll have like a education enforcement week where we just put the flyer on. Hey, look.
Yeah.
Can't say we didn't tell you.
Maybe have like OCA and someone from your department work together to develop.
Whatever you need.
how it
Got
goes.
my email address. I'll put you in contact. with
Okay.
Whatever we can do. I want the impact of the sheriff's office not to be felt in citations.
Okay.
I don't think anybody wins by doing that.
Any other questions for Matt before we let him go?
No, one suggestion, through the chair, I think as part of the education, component, it would be good to, remind people that if they have a vehicle that, they barely use an extra vehicle, or something parked in the garage forever that, they're hoping to fix and it's been 10 years already, that they can donate it and, free themselves, because many people I know, they have to keep on moving that vehicle because, street sweeper, whatever, and they keep on rotating around. So is actually a bother, for somebody to have to do
That's
that.
sentimental value.
Exactly, yeah, but at the same time, you have to keep on your toes, moving it around, and parking is tight. So, I guess giving that advice to people as part of the educational component wouldn't hurt because maybe it'll make people think, yeah, I have too many cars, I should just get it.
Yeah, and I think a suggestion if you do push something out like a brochure, for the council is create a QR code on it and people can just scan their phone on it. It can be in Spanish, English, and it can have all those pointers that you're bringing up.
Right.
And you can kind of put that everywhere. You know, businesses can put that up for their residents.
We could build this into, I was just thinking is it the quarterly newsletter that OCA sends out to everyone? That would be, we could have a page in there and just Middlefield is done. Here are the things that really need to have people focused on some of the issues we've discussed here. And to your point, have a QR code there that will.
You can put it all in there. So, you know, abandoned vehicles will be removed and, you know,
Yeah.
start taking a bigger approach. But I want, like I said, I want to kind of we're going to get there. It just, you know, we have to kind of have a measured approach to it so we don't shock the consciousness of the neighborhood.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for your
No
presentation.
problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll be here.
Second presentation tonight is going to be from Kristen Hammock, who manages the Redwood City Parking Permit Program. She's going to share the experiences they've had, kind of the issues that led to the creation of their permit system, how it works, how expensive it is. And take it away, Christian. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here again to discuss with you our Redwood City's parking and our permit program. I'm just going to briefly go through kind of the information that I shared previously with the group, and then I'll be available for any questions that we may have. First slide. Okay. Just real quick, I'm going to touch on kind of real quick on the state of the parking, kind of a little background, program details, some considerations if you're looking at doing your own program, and then I'll be available for some questions. I'll just start out real quick. I think just following up on what was said by the sheriff's officer over there. I agree that the permit parking is just a tool. It's only as good as you kind of as well as you use it. I think for the tool to be effective, you really do need education, engineering, and enforcement. Education, you need to have a consensus buy-in on the program. So you need to make sure you're communicating with the community and have them understanding what you're trying to do and agreeing and get buying into the program. Engineering, you need to have a program that's designed to really address the issues that the community is facing. So it does you no good setting parking restrictions on just Mondays and Tuesdays if Thursdays and Fridays is where all your issues of parking are coming up. So that's really important. And you need the enforcement part also to make sure that there's compliance, and you don't want to be so heavy-handed that you're issuing tickets so frequently that it's causing upset and stirring up the community and really creating a hardship on the members of the community. But you also want to encourage the better behavior and getting people to continue with the buy-in of the program. So with that, I'll go with the next slide, please. So just kind of looking at Redwood City's program, we started our programs in the mid 80s. Again, this was just a tool that we were trying to address the parking concerns that we've had across the city. Redwood City, much like North Fair Oaks, is facing lots of issues with extended wide driveways, RVs, boats, other large vehicles being parked on the streets, abandoned vehicles, commercial vehicles, dealing with street sweeping as was brought up, and compliance with curb painting and like red zones, green zones, and that sort. Next slide. This just kind of shows a heat map of parking complaints. This consists of about 9,000 annual complaints that the city got. This is about a couple years old. That's through our parking, our MyRWC mobile application. You can submit complaints about. And so that's 1 year we got it was about 9,000 complaints that were submitted regarding parking issues. That's not including about 6,000 complaints that the PD fielded directly regarding parking issues. Next slide, please. So with Redwood City's parking program, we currently have four parking permit zones. The first two was kind of the magenta on the left and the green one kind of next to it, just to the right of it. The magenta one is around Sequoia Hospital, where we were dealing with at that point. Each area has its own distinct issues, and so we were trying to address those issues, the specific issues, and craft the program to work with those issues. So the magenta area was around Sequoia Hospital. We were dealing with spillover from the hospital at the time. This hospital didn't have very large parking area. And a lot of the staff parking was ending up spilling over into the neighborhood. The green area is where we have Sequoia High School. And so obviously that was, in addition to Sequoia High School, there's also, I think there's five other elementary schools right in that general vicinity. So we had a lot of school parking that was taking place, whether it's students parking or parents for all the different schools. And so that was really congesting the neighborhood and causing some issues. Then we have the blue area was added next, and that's just on the outskirts of the downtown where we started kind of in the about 20, I think that was 2010-ish around that time, where with a lot of new developments in the downtown, redevelopments, and a lot more activity taking place. We had a lot of spillover starting to happen with the business community within the downtown. And so the neighborhood there came together and decided they wanted to and start a program. And then on the far right is the Friendly Acres neighborhood, kind of right just south of the Stanford Stanford University campus. They were, I think they have a similar feel to what's the North Fair Oaks is dealing with, kind of adjacent to some of those the areas of the neighborhood, and dealing with both commercial spillover happening, and additionally, kind of a new impact that we were seeing was internal impacts, where you had a lot more. This is also the time where a lot more ADUs started to come in on board, and we are approving, and so we had a lot of spillover from residents having more vehicles for the property than they could fit on within their property. And so that's why that program got started. Next. And then so just kind of discuss kind of our permit program details, how we go about the process of determining if we want to look at moving forward with the program. All our programs were initiated by the community. The city's didn't go out looking to start a program. These were all program requests that we've got from the community. The community had kind of representatives that we worked with, and we helped bring the process forward. So we require a petition to kind of start the process of 50% of the addresses within the area that we're looking to consider to do that. Then we conduct some parking surveys throughout the area. And we like to see approximately about an 80% occupancy rate in the areas to average occupancy to determine whether a permit program might be helpful in dealing with some of the issues. And then on top of that, we also do a survey, kind of send our own survey. Even though people sign a petition, they may not be 100% in favor of it, having their own neighbors coming to their door asking them to sign petitions. So we want to try to keep it impartial, let them provide feedback in a kind of a neutral manner. So we do our own survey. We look for about a 25% response rate, and we want to see a strong support in the responses. So we ask for about a 67% support for the program. So we really look to try to get people supporting the program before we move forward with it. Parallel to all this, we do a lot of outreach with the community, whether it's holding community meetings in the neighborhoods or setting up meetings in City Hall, have discussions with the members of the community and kind of really hear the feedback on kind of what's working, what's not working, what are the issues they're trying to address, and try to make sure that the program would be a good fit. Next slide. And so with that, I think some of the considerations for moving forward, if you're looking at your own program, is there support for a program? Does the community want it? Will they support it? What are they trying to solve for? Is it the spillover from some of the businesses in the area? Is it dealing with their neighbor that has 10 cars and they're all parked on the street? Trying to figure out those issues. What are the right restrictions? Do you need restrictions 5 days a week just during the business week? Or do you need 7 days a week restrictions? Do you need restrictions in the evenings? That's something to consider. You also need to consider what impacts the program will have on the community members. I mean, residents with multiple vehicles, depending on how you limit the amount of permits that are issued, will they be able to deal with that? If you only allow, right now, Redwood City only allows 3 permits per address. So people with 4 vehicles, they need to keep that one vehicle that doesn't have a permit on their property. So some, that'll work for some residents. It may not work for others. So that's something to consider. How to handle home-based businesses. As was mentioned, we have a real specific kind of commercial vehicle code, like vans and stuff like that, that people have like an electrician's van or something like that is not considered commercial vehicle. But you need to consider how the permit program might impact anybody that's running a home business, whether maybe a daycare or something like that in the neighborhood. Inoperable vehicles, boats and RVs, how are you gonna handle that? Are you gonna allow permits for RVs? Are you gonna allow ones for boats? Things that can consider. And then with ADUs and the housing issues that are in the Bay Area, not just in Redwood City, but across the whole peninsula. There's a lot of multiple families are living in a single family homes. And so how are you gonna handle that? Again, that may come back to the kind of the first one is the families that have more vehicles than maybe you're issuing permits for. I need to think about how that might work out. And then what's the available budget to spend on the program? And what kind of enforcement are you looking to provide out of it? And what expectations the community has for that enforcement? Are they expecting officers to be driving constantly up and down the street 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day? Or are they looking for just maybe it just be a complaint driven kind of enforcement? So there's different levels of that you need to think about and kind of different costs associated with the levels of enforcement that you're looking at. And then with that, I will open it up for any questions. Next slide.
Questions from the council for Christian?
I do have one. First of all, thank you for coming back. Very informative. Appreciate your time. How do you receive the complaints? Do you have a program how does it work?
Yeah, so we have a mobile application, so you can just download the app on your phone and people can submit it. It works out pretty well for people to submit concerns, but it also makes it very easy to submit concerns. So we do have some residents or some people that'll just go walk up and take it on themselves to walk up a block or walk in their whole neighborhood, putting in 20 or 30 different complaints about every little issue they see. So that's the positive and the negative of it. It makes it easy to get that communication and kind of get the feedback from the community. But some people may take advantage of it and abuse it to some degree. So you have to work on kind of making sure you're addressing the issues and kind of set priorities with the complaints that come in.
Okay, and one other question. I think you might have mentioned last time the enforcement portion. Could you remind us how do you do the enforcement?
So right now, Redwood City has 4 parking enforcement officers. 2 are focused on our downtown, doing enforcement in the kind of around the metered zones of the downtown, and 2 kind of handle the outside the downtown parking issues, which includes the residential permits. They don't go and patrol like the permit zones every day. It's a periodic kind of check in the neighborhood that they do. We get so many parking complaints in, so a lot of that is they have to prioritize ones that they feel are safety issues, people parked in red zones, blocking travel lanes, things like that. But then they do rounds and have a kind of schedule that they go periodically to the neighborhood. So it's not every day that they're going to be in the neighborhood issuing citations, and they rotate it and try to keep it so it's not so consistent.
Thank you.
Juan Carlos.
Thank you. Yeah, your different zones that you show here, how do you, is that decided by the distance, the area each zone, or how is that determined?
It's a combination of the community's interests in participating in the program. So as part of that survey, we kind of we try to identify what the issue we're trying to address is. So for example, the high school spillover that's happening. So, and we kind of look at the general area and see what the parking pattern is in that area. And so we identify kind of how far we think we think it would be needed to kind of discourage people from parking in that area. So maybe we typically would like the high school, I think we looked at a couple blocks from the school. While some high schoolers may park 2 or 3 blocks away, the vast majority are probably gonna find an alternative, or risk the citation, and park in the area. So it's a combination of kind of using our engineering judgment and kind of looking at the parking patterns in the area, and then what the community that surrounding the area that wants to participate. So if there's a street that's right in along the frontage and they don't want to participate, we're not going to force them to participate. And like I said, we need a strong support of that block to participate in the program. We're not gonna like skip one block and kind of have spaces. We'll do a consistent area. So we're not gonna have like gaps, but we will cut it off at areas where we think we have a consistent support for the program.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions from council members?
I do have one question.
Go, please.
You mentioned that residents can get up to 3 permits per household.
Correct, per address, yes.
Yeah, and can you talk about the cost to the residents and whether or not that covers running the program?
So currently, we do not charge for our residential parking permits. The city currently subsidizes the program. We use some money is budgeted in our parking operations for the program, and so we cover it there. That money's supported by our parking fund. But we are looking at, potentially, we did try to bring fees for the parking permits. This was prior to the pandemic, and at the time, there wasn't enough support for it to add fees to the permit. So we're continuing to subsidize that permitting process.
One more question, if I may. The parking permits around the Friendly Acres area, which is more similar to what we have in North Fair Oaks.
Yes.
Do those have any special restrictions like hours of the day or what?
Yeah, so right now the restrictions there is Monday through Friday. I think I'll say it's 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. I forget which exact hours it is. But it doesn't go kind of later in the evenings, and it doesn't go into on the weekends currently.
Okay. Thank you.
There is a fair contingent of the community that wants to look at expanding it to later hours and the weekends, but we haven't made that change yet. Yes.
You mentioned something pretty critical to me. You said we need to figure out what are we solving for? And I think for us, we keep saying we need more parking, but we definitely do. But do we need it in the evening? Do we need it for the businesses on Middlefield? Do we need it for the residences? I think we need to determine what that is. In setting up your program, how did you go about figuring that out? Did you hire a third-party company? Did you do surveys? What was your approach?
So our program was geared towards the residents. So a lot of it was done through kind of discussions with the community and collecting feedback from the community members, seeing where the pain points were, whether they were coming home and not finding any vehicles, any spaces on the street to park in, finding out reasons why they couldn't park on their own property if they were use their garages, kind of understanding how the area was working, within the community. So, I think that helps kind of really guide kind of how you want to structure a program. With regards to the spillover of the commercial areas, this program's, as I mentioned, is geared towards the residents, so we were cognizant of, we want to understand why there's spillover from the business community, but our intent in these programs is not to provide commercial parking. Now, all our permit parking areas, they're not like a full out restriction of parking. We allow, they're all 2-hour time limits. So we do allow some parking, for like typical public use. Our understanding is there's gonna be other people coming in the areas for different things, and so we don't want to make it so cumbersome that we're keeping everybody out and this area is only for residents. But the idea is that we're not trying to have the residential streets be the new staff parking for a nearby
Right,
grocery store or something like that.
agreed. Thank you.
So you start pretty much with, like community roundtables or surveys or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first process might be like sending out a survey, or if there's some community members that are very interested in it, maybe kind of partnering with them to try to either set up a community meeting to kind of have that roundtable, or seeing if they could run a survey, talking with some of their community members. So yeah, collecting that feedback. I think setting up, if you can set up an online survey or mail out a survey, I think that's could help out a lot. The question, I mean, you want to be careful with relying on just like a mailing survey, because a lot of people just see, oh, this is from the county, or this is from Redwood City, and don't really pay attention to it. So I think having that communication and that dialogue is important. And so I think, yeah, trying to find those community members that are gonna maybe take lead in kind of promoting the program in the community, if there are any, I think is important, and kind of working with them to kind of see what way is best to kind of get information from the community members.
What have you found to be your best tool to get more community input, more advocacy? Because I mean, our meetings are fairly thin at the moment.
Yeah.
On the work.
Again, we've relied heavily on having those kind of community spokespeople that kind of really help. We try to, if there's a neighborhood association meeting, we've gone to those and trying to generate people to kind of get interest in, if there's interest in a program, or providing feedback. Yeah, that's one of the issues, is that, I mean, if there's not a lot of community interest and you're having a hard time trying to get that information and get that community involvement, then there may not be the support for a program to be implemented. So a lot of these programs that we have really had kind of that momentum already a little bit behind it. And so it wasn't as hard to try to get that engagement.
Yes, no question.
Please go ahead.
When you were looking into the implementation of your program, did you consider other plans? And if so, did you follow or did you copy one particular plan from other cities? How did it work? I can't really speak, because since the start of the program really started in the mid-80s. And so I don't know the full history on how it was kind of originally developed. And so I think we've just kind of taken what we've been doing since then and kind of evolved it a little bit over time. We've updated our code, it's probably about 5 years now, to kind of allow more flexibility in kind of how we do the time restrictions and kind of how many permits we issue and different features like that. But I think a lot of it was already since before my time. I'm not quite sure if they use any models from previous programs. Thank you.
Any other questions for Christian?
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Um, Third presenter tonight is Public Works. They're going to give us a little bit of history about a study that was done and was started almost 10 years ago in regard to actually studying the problem in North Fair Oaks. And
You mind if I sit here?
no, please go right ahead.
Thank you.
Development of recommendations, that kind of thing. So some of this work has been done. It'd be interesting to get some background on it. See where we want to go here.
Thank you very much. My name is Khoa Vo, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Road Services Division at the County of San Mateo Public Works Department. With me here is our Director, Ann Stillman. Just a brief recap of what Public Works has done as part of developing this program, the residential permit program. It started around 2016 when the residents in the North Fair Oaks area brought this topic, this issue up to our executive, Mike Callaghy at that time. Subsequent to that meeting, our staff, our department worked together to develop a framework. Essentially, what would the program look like? What impacts would it have? What criteria would be established? How it would be set up? What areas would this be focused on? From 2016 through 2018, there were a couple of presentations made to the North Fair Oaks Community Council. April 18 was one, and I believe June 18 was the second time that the framework for that program was presented here. Very similar criteria that the Redwood City has. And I think we model a lot of those criteria after the City of Redwood City's residential permit program. For example, it's the number of permits to be issued for an address, whether is it 2, is it 4, is it 5, whatever the appropriate number was. There were some discussions among the neighborhoods, among the communities. And I think at that time, the suggestion was 2 permits per residential address. There were some discussions about multiplexes, multi-dwelling units. How would that work? I think the discussion at that time was 1 permit per multi-dwelling unit. And distance, the blocks, the geography, all of that was identified and discussed. There were discussions about what would it take to support this program in terms of community support. Similar to what Redwood City has, the suggestion at that time was 50+1% of the respondents to respond to the survey. With that, at least 67% of those have to be supportive of that program. So those are just the basic criteria that were discussed and shared at that time. Subsequent to those meetings in 2018, the department presented that concept, that program to the Board of Supervisors in July 19, 2019. And the board evaluated, reviewed, but there were no concurrence from the board members. And at that time, the board decided to continue that item. And as far as we know, that has never been brought up by the board, by the community. So as of now, there is not a residential parking in place anywhere in the county. But we do have the framework that we can look at, and I did share with the chair earlier what those policies, those draft programs were. And we can talk and discuss and come up with some ideas, what needs to be done, what is it that we're trying to address and trying to solve, how can we do that? I know there were some discussions about cost, the education component, and also the enforcement component. And those were topics that were brought up and discussed at the board meeting in 2019 also. And those topics were never really addressed or resolved. So I think those are a lot of outstanding issues that should be talked and discussed and somehow come to a resolution to be able to move a program forward. And I think that's all I have with the background. Very brief, very short. If anybody have any questions.
what were the issues in 2016 that really drove that? Because I get the sense there was a lot of input from the community. We have a problem here. We need to do something. Obviously a lot of resources, a lot of time and money were spent studying this, developing a potential program to have it not go forward. So
I do not have all of that information, the background information. The very brief recap that I received was just a communication from the community to Mike Callaghy, and Mike Callaghy asked DPW to look into developing a program.
was there community input? Did this start up, as Christian suggested, from kind of local people, driving this, or was it more part of the government function that came up, identified the problem and said, we need to look at something here?
I believe it was brought forth by the community, the local community. The North Fair Community Council was part of that support to bring that program, or have Public Works look at developing that program.
Yeah, through the
Please, go
chair,
ahead.
I was already part of the council, and as I remember, there have always been, kind of bouts of complaints bubbling up at different times. And I think around that time, there was a lot of traffic congregating around the Siena Youth Center, that area. And so county was trying to consider a couple of areas, one or two areas in North Fair Oaks as testing ground for parking permits, and just a few blocks to try it out and see if it could work or not. But yeah, it never crystallized into anything.
I think we need to look at the police department's complaints. Where are they coming from specifically? What type of complaints we're getting, so we know what we're trying to solve. We gotta get the data for that.
So I think that would be a good start. And something like the chart that Chris showed us, where it looked the red areas, can show the really bad spots where the I think that that should be considered, but not as the totality of the issues, because I know many people who don't even call to report parking issues because they just don't believe that the system works. And they think I'm wasting my time. Nobody's going to come and do anything, so they don't do it. So, but it still could show, where the complaints are coming from, and maybe start from there. But, the other thing that I was going to bring up also is that Redwood Cities has very smartly organized, the city in boroughs, if you will. And so there's a community association in each area that kind of gathers, residents, and they talk about the very local issues. They recognize what their neighborhood is. They talk about those issues. And I agree that that's the pulse of the community and the neighborhoods, because parking issues vary. For example, the area around Siena Youth Center has always been, has had a lot of difficulty for parking, for sure. around the light industrial area on Edison Way, there's also been that issue, forever. And so there's also around a spot around the Fair Oaks School, because not only there's that school right there, but there's also a few auto shops. And then on the backside, there's a lot of apartment complexes, which, just creates a lot of density in that specific area. But yeah, I guess a multi-pronged approach, to sort of define those critical areas first, and then going from there, I don't know, maybe in the avenues, parking is not as bad, and neighbors there may say, we don't need it. We don't want to pay, that kind of thing, but it varies from area to area.
Be interesting to kind of pick up on your point, George, to get kind of the details. What was interesting to me was the sheriff explained they had 511 complaints, but they wrote over 5,000 citations. So enforcement isn't a problem. It doesn't sound like. With that said, there's a messaging, there's an education element out there that's missing, because you wouldn't write 5,000 citations if people were obeying parking laws.
To add to what you're saying, just in front of Middlefield Road at my old restaurant, parking was a nightmare. I mean, forget not having parking, but just people parking in my driveway, blocking it, so that they go to the credit union, and none of my customers could ever get in the driveway. And this was nonstop. There's no one to call. They stay for 10 to 2 minutes at a time. Nothing can be done about it. And so the businesses there, myself included, we're all struggling with the same issue.
It would be interesting to get what Christian was referring to for our area, the heat map. Where do the complaints
Where are they coming from?
come from? 500 complaints. It would also be interesting to hear from the sheriff where the 5,000 citations were,
Agreed.
where the real,
That's what we gotta see.
the real trouble spots there. So you've
We
got
gotta know what
the
we're solving.
two sides of it. Yeah. And we've kind of migrated into the discussion, problem-solving portion of this. And any ideas from you? I mean, opening up Middlefield is going to solve some of the problems with spillover and things like that. I don't know, just your thoughts as someone with a lot of community experience and knowledge of how all this stuff works.
We look forward to finishing Middlefield Road,
Oh, yes.
for sure. And as you know, part of what was done before Middlefield Road, because we're changing the parking diagonal parallel, was to take care of those two lots. And we talked about that a little bit earlier about the limited parking in those and whether they're enforced. Okay, so that was really to replace and give back what we had. So looking forward to that. When I get to the place where I'm like, what are we trying to solve? So I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
When there was a lot of work done on this in terms of, it's my understanding, but I think that it was really the road division, Quaz division, but it was Joe Lococo that really worked with his team to talk about the parking issues and come up with the proposed parking permit program. Definitely had more than one visit to the North Forks Community Council to talk about it. So, were there discussions? Was there outreach? Definitely. One of the things I did was just in preparation for the meeting, looking at the board website. And so there is information there from the meeting that Paul is referring to. So if you go to the board website, the board meeting date was July 9th, 2019. And you can pull down the board report, you can see what the ordinance was, and you can see there's a description of what the permit parking program would look like. Just so that you have that in your head, like what was developed before, because something was developed and thought potentially to be implemented. In my mind, or my memory, is that some of that focused on the sort of Selby Lane and maybe spillover parking from Fifth Avenue, concerns that people were parking in that area as well. So my memory from, and sort of being distant from it was that was the first area to look at. Another thing that I was just looking at in my files, and I think it was somewhat in connection with the community plan. So the North Fair Oaks Community Plan was put together in 2011. And one of the things that was identified was, parking's an issue. So here we are in 2024, we're still, right, talking about it. But I found something like a parking study and strategy that was worked on at that time, I think in part to look at the community plan and how things were designated in terms of zoning and whatnot, and then how does that translate into parking? So there were some studies, there was an effort. So I kind of think that's another place to look at, is what were the findings of that study? Those are some of the things that go around in my head. Again, what are we trying to solve? Because I know that some areas, I think some of the things that Christian was talking about is that when you think about who is living where and how many cars people may have, and what is it we're trying to solve? I want the cars. We have certain areas when it comes to no parking because of street sweeping days. I want them moved so that we can clean the trash out, because that's part of what everybody needs to be working towards is stormwater compliance and zero trash. But so, you think about those different issues, like how many people are living in places, how many cars do they need just to be able to sort of live and work and get where they need to go. Areas are definitely overparked, some areas more than others when you think about North Fair Oaks. And I also think that with Redwood City's examples or their permit parking programs in those 4 areas, the need for permit parking and a program in those areas are driven by something. There's some sort of external force, whether it's a school or whether they're businesses that are causing a situation where, the residents are really feeling like something needs to be done, please help control it. So, and I don't have the history. Like Kwa mentioned, this item was developed in terms of here's the plan for how to do a permit parking program. A lot of effort went into it. Took it to the board, but I think it was, let's continue it to a later date. So I'm not sure the appetite was there. And I don't know all the reasons for that. Definitely when we think about a program, we have to be realistic in terms of resources and what it takes. And that's something that, is real for all of us to consider. Those are some of the things going around in my head right now.
And I think that was an issue back in 2019, if I remember right, when I went to the board was, well, it has to be self-funding, and the board didn't want to charge $40 a car in the community to something like that. But I think to George's point, a good next step would be to take a look at what the issue is. Specifically, we can't come up with that here, but look at where the citations are being written, look at where the complaints are coming from, and see if there's something there. And then perhaps the other side of that is to the sheriff's point, educating people, celebrating the fact that Middlefield Road has been completed, and now we're going to be looking at enforcement more. And oh, by the way, here are the things that, that we see between commercial vehicles and businesses with vehicles parked on the street when they shouldn't be there, and that kind of thing, kind of walking people through that in 2024 with an eye towards, okay, once we understand where the issues are, once we've educated people, then maybe enforcement or something like that is a way to go.
One of the steps I can take, in addition to getting the data from the police department that, we'll get, I can walk up and down Middlefield Road and just chat with the local businesses and see what complaints they have, start gathering data that way to start.
It'll be interesting to hear back from that.
I'd also say with Middlefield Road, like, we need to get it done, and then things will settle a bit. So, when you're changing, we're changing the roadway configuration, people need to get used to that. We're changing, we're gonna free up the parking where people hadn't been able to park for a while. So I think it'd be good to let things sort of settle out a bit, let people get used to things before you really start analyzing what the new
Good
conditions.
idea. Yeah.
And then also I will look, I mean, I'm just sort of looking at this and browsing through this document. I don't, it's 124 pages, so I think that's just another resource if you're trying to kind of wrap your heads around what was done in the past. What effort was put towards looking at North Oaks and thinking about the parking issues? Because some may be similar today, but it's just another resource document, which how did I get it? Where did I get it? Not sure right now. Probably some of the road division folks, but that could be a document that I think WAC could make available to Brooks and maybe share it, but one more kind of research piece to
That would be great.
help you understand problem areas that may have been identified.
The other thing, and I mentioned this to Captain Fox when he was here, was AB 413. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Went into effect January 1, and it prohibits parking within 20 feet of any crosswalk, whether it's marked or unmarked. I was kind of doing the aerial, and I took a look at the aerial view of just Middlefield Road, counting the number of intersections where that could be an issue, and we could lose.
I thought that was San Francisco. So statewide?
Statewide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, there's no enforcement of it in 2024. So police sheriff won't be enforcing it this year, but next year they'll start enforcing it. Meantime, if you've got a bus stop within 20 feet crosswalk, the bus stop has to be moved. If there's parking there, parking is now prohibited. If you're in one of those communities, some of the communities where they've created, parklets, they've closed streets off, restaurants now have that street frontage within 20 feet of a crosswalk, marked or unmarked. Got to get it out of there. So it's just, I don't know if, I don't know how that's going to impact Middlefield, but just looking at a map of, an aerial view of it, it looks like there will be intersections where that's going to have to be taken into account as well. And that's fewer parking spaces along Middlefield. So one more thing that's gonna hit us.
And keep in mind that with the new design of the Middlefield Road, we already lost parking spots.
Did we actually? Yeah.
But they're made up by the two parking lots that I just mentioned.
Right.
That was the whole point, right? Is that the CEO really felt like, whoa, we can't take away parking without replacing it. And that's why then the county purchased, I think it was 3 parcels on Middlefield Road at the corner of Second.
Yeah.
And then also we had that permit for the parking lot, I think on Berkshire, that's on San Francisco PUC property. That's a smaller lot, but it's still available. Sort of.
Just an open thought. I've been pushing for this idea, and I don't know how receptive it is from your side. But on Middlefield and Second, where we have the parking lot the county purchased, maybe building up, putting a garage or some type of structure. What would be the approach or receptiveness to get something like that done? If any?
Well, like thinking money is one piece of the equation.
But I'm thinking about the process behind it.
Yeah.
Obviously the money.
Yeah, I mean, something that could be brought up, but definitely the funding for it. I also kind of have this recollection that, we were talking about, I mean, it has been talked about in terms of parking and parking structures and does that make sense? But I think it was a financial outlay to purchase the properties for that parking lot. Parking structure would take a lot more. And then you have to look at what do you get out of it as well, right? In terms of the stacking and right?
I guess we need the data first to see what the problem is.
Yeah, let's do that. And then let's work offline, go OCA and the sheriff's department working together. When would the next newsletter go out? Is that?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I can check and get back to you.
Okay. Well, as I was sitting here looking at this, I was thinking, maybe even if we frame that page as a letter from Sheriff Corbett or something like that to attract people's attention to it with the acknowledgement that Middlefield Road is now done. Keep this in mind, folks, because this is the law and we'll, at some point, however she wanted to word it, step up enforcement. Hopefully that'll provide us with a little bit of short-term relief. And then to your point, George, we can dig into the data and see.
The chair, Emma has her hand up. Emma has her hand up.
Oh, Emma, okay. Emma, go ahead, please.
Hi, Brooks, how are you and council members? You know, I'm committed to, on OCA side, we'll work with the SO's office to work on some outreach efforts, but I do want to share that Josh, our business analyst who's been working on the business, on the Middlefield Road, as soon as we found out, you know, the new street signs are, the signage went up, including enforcement, he's been out there educating the businesses now. So that's what he's been focusing on, going door to door this week. We are scheduling to put something in our newsletter, but I'll work with the team to see, and with the SO's office, to really find maybe we'll do a special mailer just about that, coupled with the newsletter. So
That
we
would be just
commit-
terrific,
we
Emma.
could commit to doing that. And I think it's really from the sheriff's office, I think, like he said, you know, they've spent so much time in really trying to build trust with the community, trying to build their community policing. And I think it's that balance of, not coming in heavy-handed, but rather working together in partnership. And so we'll work very closely with them to make sure we get the right message out.
That would be great, Emma. Yeah, as Matt noted, we're not going to cite our way out of this. You know, it's very much a cooperative effort. OCA, the community, the sheriff to work our way through this. That would be terrific. Thank you very much for that. Any other points of discussion on this? I'd like to give some time for public comment if we've got anyone on the line in the room. Is there any public comment? No? Okay.
Can I ask a question that's maybe not necessarily related to public works, but my question is related to ADUs and whether those require parking space, and also how many of those are we getting in North Fair Oaks? I guess maybe it's not your office.
Right.
Maybe
More like planning and
planning
building,
building.
I
right?
can answer that. I actually built an ADU not long ago, and they do not require, well, at the time they did require parking, but I think the state law recently changed where they don't require parking now. But now the new law, I think it just passed 2 weeks ago, they consider ADUs to be a separate entity. You could even sell them as a separate property, yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Don't quote me on the exact wording of that, but yeah, it was a couple weeks ago that they passed the new law.
Any other questions, comments on this? There's no public comment, is that correct? Okay, thank you both.
Thank
very
you.
much
Thank you.
For your time tonight.
Can I make a quick pitch for our Public Works Department?
Certainly.
Our Road Services Department are hiring a lot of extra help employees and road maintenance worker ones. If you know anybody who are interested in an extra help position that might turn into a permanent road maintenance worker positions, please let them know. And we're actively recruiting right now. Our managers are in the process of talking to people that,
These are full-time permanent positions.
right now it'd be an extra help, full-time extra help, but within 3 months, it could transition into a full-time position.
Wow. Okay, well, that's terrific. It's good
Yeah.
to know.
Yeah, we're looking at hiring about 6.
Oh, boy.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, with that, we're adjourned. But we'll see you next week at our regular session.
All right. Thanks very much.